Om Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Pariyantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Good. Be seated, please. Good. Oops. Good. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahavirjan Karava Vahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvisha Vahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Good. This one, yes. Nice to see you all this morning. Nice, I think more of you are coming also. I think we're getting used to this pandemic accommodation, and as we said that we've made arrangements so that you're as safe here as you are at your own homes, pretty much. So nice to have you all here for our Bhagavad Gita class. Welcome also to those who are watching online. There are many. We will proceed with today's class, beginning with some chanting. And we'll begin by reciting verse 17. And as always, please listen to me. As you're listening to me, be sure to read the translation and then repeat after me. Tad buddhayas tadatmanas, tad buddhayas tadatmanas, tannishtas tatparayanaha, tannishtas tatparayanaha, gacchantya punaravrittim, gacchantya punaravrittim, jnana nirdhuta kalmashaha, jnana nirdhuta kalmashaha, vidya vinaya sampanne, vidya vinaya sampanne, brahmane gavihastani, brahmane shunichaiva Shvapakecha, Shunichaiva Shvapakecha, Pandita Samadarshinaha, Pandita Samadarshinaha, Ihaiva Tarjata Sargo, Ihaiva Tarjata Sargo, Yesham Sam Yestitam Manaha, Yesham Sam Yestitam Manaha, Nirdosham hi samam brahma, Nirdosham hi samam brahma, Tasmad brahmani te sthitaha, Tasmad brahmani te sthitaha, na prahrishyet priyam prapya, na prahrishyet priyam prapya, no dvijet prapya cha priyam, no dvijet prapya cha priyam, sthira buddhira sammudho, sthira buddhira sammudho, brahmavid brahmani sthitaha, brahmavid brahmani Bhya swasaktatma, Bhya swasaktatma, Vindatyatmani yat sukham, Vindatyatmani yat sukham, Sabrahma Yoga Yuktatma, Sabrahma Yoga Yuktatma, Sukhamakshayam Ashnute, Sukhamakshayam Ashnute, Yehi samsparshaja bhoga, Yehi samsparshaja bhoga, Dukkha yonaya hevate, Dukkha yonaya hevate, Adhyantavantah kaunteya, Adhyantavantah kaunte, Nate shuramate buddhaha, Nate shuramate buddhaha. And we will pause there and return to our verses. We concluded last week with this verse 18. And verse 18? Yes, thank you. And in the last several verses, Sri Krishna has begun to unfold really the highest wisdom of the rishis, knowledge found originally in the Upanishads, knowledge which, like a road map, teachings which are meant to lead you to discover inside yourself your true nature. This roadmap metaphor, I think, is useful because, as we've commented several times, we're not here to, nice to put it in very bold terms, we're not here to study the Bhagavad Gita. And if you're coming here to study a Bhagavad Gita, you're wasting your time, because the subject matter is not the Bhagavad Gita, the subject matter is your true nature, right? You get the distinction. So these teachings are not like a history book where you have to collect all the information and memorize all the details. These teachings are much more like a roadmap, directing you to look within yourself, to discover your true nature. And just to make that a little bit clearer, since it's the essence of what we're studying here, you already know that you are a conscious being. You are a being, you exist, sat, and you are conscious, awareful, chit. You are sat, chit. No one has to tell you that you are an awareful being. But these teachings help you discover that the awareful being you are is not an ordinary thing like you might take it to be, but in fact, that consciousness, which is the essence of your being, is extraordinary. As we discussed starting way back in chapter 2, your consciousness has no limit or boundary. It is all pervasive. If consciousness is all pervasive, there cannot be many consciousnesses. There can only be one vast, all-pervasive consciousness manifest or reflected in every living being's mind. And that consciousness, again, we discussed at length in chapter 2, that consciousness is utterly unaffected by anything happening outside and anything happening in your mind. If something negative happens outside of you, or if something negative is happening in your mind, your consciousness reveals those activities, remaining completely unaffected, just like the metaphor we've used before, just like the sun is unaffected by what it shines upon, by what it reveals, or the metaphor from the prior class, just like a lotus leaf is unaffected by water, which balls up on its surface. So, this is the wisdom that Sri Krishna is teaching here. He is giving you, he's not just giving you the roadmap, he is leading you by the hand, step by step, on this process of self-inquiry. And then in the last verse that we just saw, when this teaching leads you to discover your consciousness is vast and complete. Oh, I didn't finish that. So conscious being, conscious, chit, being, Sat, Sat Chit. Third word you know so familiarly, Ananda. What I just described was Atma's Ananda, being limitless, vast, being one, pervading the universe, being utterly unaffected by anything that happens outside and inside. This is the Ananda of Atma. Ananda, as we've discussed before, is not something, it's so often translated as bliss, but bliss is something you experience. We're not talking about something you experience, we're talking about you. So you cannot translate Ananda as bliss and at the same time use it to refer to your true nature. It's better to translate. Puja Swami Tadatmananda often went for words like fullness, completeness, perfection. These are words that indicate the nature of your consciousness. So the consciousness that you thought was ordinary is actually extraordinary. These teachings can lead you to discover it. That consciousness is what we loosely call your divine nature, that within you which is truly divine. And in the last verse, what we saw is a comment on the fact that when you discover that your consciousness is divine, then what about the consciousness in every other person? Notice we just observed that consciousness is one and the same in all beings. So if that consciousness in you is divine, then the consciousness in every single being is equally divine, no matter what. No matter how obnoxious or even vile the person might be, the consciousness within is perfect, complete, divine, and utterly affected by that vileness. The metaphor that our commentator, Madhusudana Saraswati, he observes, and I think I quoted this in the last class, when the sun shines on the sacred Ganga river, does the sun become more holy? And when the sun shines on the pool created by a latrine, water found in a latrine, is the sun polluted by its contact with that water? You get the point. The sun remains utterly untainted, unchanged by what it shines upon. So that same consciousness shines within as the inner divinity in every single person, regardless of their behavior and thinking. And Sri Krishna says at the end of the 18th verse, this is for panditaha, for the enlightened ones, wise ones, who are samadarshinaha. They see the oneness, the sameness. Sama is same. Samadarshan, one who sees the sameness of all, one who sees the sameness of that consciousness within all. So, that being said, the next several verses continue to describe the nature of an enlightened person, helping you, so to speak, get inside the mind of an enlightened person. As a young student, I had this feeling very strongly. My guru had something so remarkable, I could tell just by what he taught. It was so remarkable, I wanted to, so to speak, get inside his mind. Or as we say in English, in casual English, get inside his head, so to speak. So here, Sri Krishna, in the next several verses, will help you get inside the head, so to speak, of an enlightened person. Ihaiva tarjata sargo, ihaiva tarjata sargo, yesham samye stitam manaha, yesham samye stitam manaha, Nirdosham hi samam brahma. Nirdosham hi samam brahma. Tasmad brahmani te stitaha. Tasmad brahmani te stitaha. Start in the second line. Yesham, for those enlightened people, those for whom their manaha, manas, mind, is sthitam, established in what? Samye, sameness, oneness. Those minds who are established in the sameness or oneness, the same one divinity we call Atma, the same Atma that is present in all living beings, the same divinity present in all living beings. Yesham, for those who appreciate that oneness of Atma, for them, in the first line, Iha eva, here indeed, sargaha, sarga often means creation, but here it means rebirth. So for those enlightened ones, sargaha, rebirth, taihi jitaha. Jitaha is conquered, taihi, by them. They have conquered rebirth, they have overcome rebirth. This is one of the, I'll call it a side effect of enlightenment. And the reason I call it a side, being free from rebirth, properly understood, is not the goal of enlightenment, it's a side effect of enlightenment. The goal of enlightenment is to be free from suffering now. A so-called side effect of enlightenment is that you're freed from suffering in following lives, because if you get reborn, you're subject to suffering. If you don't get reborn, you're not subject to suffering. That's why, as a so-called side effect, enlightenment frees you from rebirth. And we gave some of the reasoning for why it's true that you're free from rebirth. We said that karmas belong to the agent of action. The karmas that cause you to get born again and again and again belong to the agent of action. Whoever did those karmas owns the results, therefore gets reborn to reap those results. But we said so clearly in this chapter and the previous chapter that Atma is, not, especially in this chapter, Atma is not an agent of action. Consciousness doesn't do anything. Consciousness reveals the activities of your mind. Consciousness reveals the activities of your body. Consciousness reveals the activities all around you. But consciousness itself doesn't do anything. Like if the sun is shining on a construction site, all the workers are busily engaged in their activities. The sun doesn't do anything. Without the sun, could they do anything? On that construction site, in absolute darkness, they couldn't do anything. So the sun enables the activities without directly participating in those activities. Do you see the metaphor? So on that construction site, the shining sun enables those activities without directly participating in them in the same way. Consciousness empowers you to act, but consciousness itself doesn't act, is not the agent of action, therefore it doesn't own the results of your deeds. There's a question concerning this that came. And the question is, we spoke about the presence of Atma not receiving the merits or demerits of one's karma, which is what I've just described. Atma is not the agent of action. Therefore, Atma does not receive the punya and papa, the religious merits and demerits. The question is, does Atma travel along with the sukshma sharira in one's next birth? Based on our discussion so far this morning, most of you can answer that question already. Does Atma travel? First of all, why should Atma travel if Atma is not the agent of action who must receive the results of past deeds. But on a more fundamental level, we've already said Atma is one and all-pervasive. If Atma is all-pervasive, Atma right now, your consciousness is not stuck inside your head. Right now, your consciousness pervades the universe. If consciousness is one and all-pervasive, as we've discussed, how can it travel? Where will it go? It's already everywhere. So that consciousness cannot travel. This is a common confusion between Atma and Sukshma Sharira, subtle body. By the way, this is all explained very, very thoroughly back in chapter 2. So if you have any lack of clarity about the distinction between Atma and your subtle body, Sukshma Sharira, if that distinction is not crystal clear, go back and review the teachings in chapter 2, especially the teachings from verse 11 through 25. So chapter 2, verses 11 through 25. Okay, so back to our verse, second half. Nirdosham hi samam brahma. So what is it that these enlightened people have discovered? They have discovered that Brahma, and here Brahma, technically speaking, Brahman is best understood as the underlying reality because of which everything exists. That's a little technical definition, but a very helpful one, and not too complicated. Everything exists because of Brahman. The metaphor is like excuse me, like thousands and thousands of pots can exist because of one clay. In the same way, the entire universe of planets, etc., exists because of one Brahman. Simple way of understanding Brahman. If Brahman is the reality of everything that exists, and you exist, your consciousness exists, then that one all-pervasive consciousness is not different from Brahman. Brahman, the one reality because of which everything exists, is identical to that one all-pervasive consciousness that dwells in us all. That's exactly what Tattvam Asi means. Tat, that underlying reality called Brahman, Twamasi, you are that. It is identical with that consciousness within you, which is not stuck inside your head, but is in fact your inner divinity, your true nature. So that Brahman, and instead of translating it here as reality because of which everything exists, suppose we translate it according to the context. In this context, Brahman refers to the divinity within you. Generally, Brahman is not translated as inner divinity, but try it out. You'll find that it's a little helpful here to understand Brahman not just as a reality of the universe, but as a reality of you, the inner divinity. So that Brahman, that inner divinity, which is samam, the same in all beings, that Brahman is nirdosham. It is free from defect, free from sin. It is perfect, it is complete, it is boundaryless, it is full. Tasmat. Therefore, te, those enlightened people, stitaha, are established. They are established Brahmani, in Brahman. Now use that new translation, in that inner divinity. Those enlightened people are established in Brahman means they're established in the understanding that their true nature is Satchidananda Atma, and that same inner truth is the truth of all beings. That's the summum. All right. And that's stitaha, being established. Stitaha, they are established. We'll see that more in the next verse. Let's go and see that. Na prahrishyet priyam prapya, na prahrishyet priyam prapya, no dvijet prapya cha priyam, no dvijet prapya cha priyam, sthira buddhira samudho, sthira buddhira samudho, brahmavit brahmani sthitaha, brahmavid brahmani sthitaha. Once again, we are inside the head, so to speak, of the enlightened person. And what does it look like inside, in there? So that enlightened person, first line, and prapya, having gained something which is priyam, something which is desirable, something which is pleasurable. So having gained something pleasurable, what about the enlightened person? Na prahrashyet. The enlightened person does not become elated when you get something good. And in the second line, prapya cha apriyam, prapya, having gained, apriyam, something which is undesirable, like a splitting headache. The enlightened person, you have to break the words apart, na udvajate. Udvajate means to, literally means to tremble. But here in the context, it means like to shrink back from that experience, or even to resent that experience. So what is being taught here? The enlightened person, when something wonderful happens, the enlightened person doesn't get puffed up and elated. When the enlightened person encounters something terrible, tragic, painful, sad, the enlightened person doesn't get pulled down, doesn't get depressed. Means the enlightened person has that equanimity. Now, equanimity doesn't mean the enlightened person is like, and go back to our pot. This pot has perfect equanimity. Something good happens, something bad happens, the pot doesn't care. Do you think the enlightened person is like that? Notice the words used. Na prahrashyet means to get elated. When something good happens, does the enlightened person become happy? Why not? Does the enlightened person get puffed up with elation? No. When something terrible happens, does the enlightened person become sad? Yeah. Does the enlightened person get depressed? No. You see the distinction. So the enlightened person is not like a pot who doesn't feel anything. Just a quick comment here. Wouldn't that be silly if the enlightened person didn't experience normal human emotions? We wouldn't want that. So, enlightenment frees you from suffering. Enlightenment does not free you from normal human emotions. Let me give you a little bit more of a technical understanding for why that's so. Very important. We shouldn't just take it, I made this comment before, that these teachings have to be understood. If I say the enlightened person is free from suffering, to say, yes, I accept that, I believe that, is not a helpful response. We have to understand how and why it's so that an enlightened person is free from suffering, and yet continues to experience happiness and sadness like every normal person. We said before, your true nature is consciousness. That consciousness is present in your experience right now. And one way of understanding our experience is that whatever happens in your mind is like, and here's a metaphor, a ripple on the ocean of consciousness. Now, consciousness can be compared to an ocean because consciousness, we said, is limitless, vast, not stuck inside your head. So that consciousness is vast like an ocean. But what is present in your experience right now is not merely consciousness. In deep sleep, what is present is consciousness alone. In samadhi, what is present, perhaps, is consciousness alone. But what is present in your experience right now is a whole lot more complicated than that. Consciousness is present, but what else is present? Well, as a minimum, the image of me sitting in front of you, the sounds of my voice, are also present in your experience. And one brilliant way of explaining this is to think about everything you see and hear as being like ripples on the ocean of consciousness. Everything you experience, this is a little technical, but let me try to make it very, very straightforward. Everything you experience is consciousness, but pure consciousness is like deep sleep or samadhi. So what you're experiencing right now is technically called conditioned consciousness. Consciousness which is affected by whatever you're experiencing right now. That's why I'm using this ripple metaphor. So water is formless, but a wave is a form. Consciousness itself is formless, but experience has form. So just as a ripple is a form of water, experience is a form of consciousness. I warned you, this is going to be a little technical, but you'll get it, no problem. Look, it's not that complicated, right? A wave is a form of water. Water is formless. Wave is a form of water. Consciousness is formless, but experience is a form of. Let me go to the board. Some topics are just nice to put up on the board. Let me try this. I hadn't planned on doing this, but can't plan everything. Okay, so imagine this is the formless ocean. And you look across the surface of the ocean, nothing. Flat, absolutely flat. But suppose on this ocean arises a wave. That wave is a form. That wave sticks out and is very clearly seen by you on the ocean. Notice the water is formless, but on this formless water, a wave is formed. Technically, we call that superimposition, all these fancy technical words we use. A wave is superimposed on the formless water, giving rise to a form. This water represents consciousness. The consciousness that pervades the universe, the consciousness which is present in you right now, the consciousness which is the basis for your experience, just as water is the basis for the wave. So now your experience then is like the wave. Right now, the wave you're experiencing is mostly a Swami Tadatmananda wave. But if you turn your head to the side and look out the window, then you'll have a different kind of wave. Or if your mind drifts off and you start thinking about something you have to do at home later, so you get different waves are born from the ocean of consciousness. one vast ocean of consciousness with many waves. And many waves, there are waves in your mind, waves in my mind, waves in every mind. The technical word that we use for these waves that arise in the ocean of consciousness is chit, consciousness. The waves are best understood as vrittis. Vritti is literally that which moves. It is a transformation that takes place in your consciousness. It's like a wave in consciousness. Now, here's the point. For the enlightened person, just like you, the ocean of consciousness is the same. For you and for an enlightened person, there's no difference at all in the ocean of consciousness. There is a difference in the waves. For many people, when something good happens, they don't just become happy, they become puffed up and elated. How about just for fun? We'll just try to illustrate that with a giant wave. They're puffed up and elated. And conversely, if something bad happens, they're utterly depressed. So this is the distinction. For the enlightened person, an enlightened person will have normal happiness, normal sadness. I'm illustrating with these waves. I think you get the idea. An enlightened person will have normal happiness, normal sadness, but be free from these extreme conditions of elation and depression. There's much more to be said here, but let's start with this. Okay, where am I? So, that's the first half. Na prahrashet priyam prapya. Having gained something good, the enlightened person doesn't become elated. No dvajet prapya cha apriyam. Having suffered something unfortunate, the enlightened person doesn't get depressed. The enlightened person does have normal emotions. What distinguishes the enlightened person is simply this. The enlightened person is free from suffering. That's it. What distinguishes you from an enlightened person, if you suffer, you are not yet enlightened. An enlightened person is absolutely free from suffering. There's a little bit more I'd like to show on the board. Let me make one more point here before we leave this messy diagram aside. Suppose something really terrible happens to the enlightened person. Really terrible. If something really terrible happens, will the enlightened person's mind be affected by that really terrible thing or not? Of course. The enlightened person's mind, and the example I've given, you've probably heard me give this metaphor of when I noticed my guru, Puja Swami Tadatmananda, looking particularly upset. I had never, ever seen him look upset like that. I asked him what happened. He told me that moments ago he was told that a dear friend died in a terrible automobile accident in India. And he had just literally moments before received this terrible news. He was visibly affected, absolutely. But even then, there was a difference. And here's the difference. The enlightened person is one who knows my true nature is this ocean of consciousness. Is water affected by waves? So if there are huge waves in the ocean during a storm, how does that affect the water? Water remains water in the presence of waves, in the absence of waves. Further, and I like this metaphor, no matter how tall the waves are, if you're in an ocean during a huge storm, the waves can be 20, 30 feet tall. But if you go just several feet below the surface, it's perfectly calm. Water remains undisturbed by waves. Your consciousness is not affected by these vrittis. If you have a happy vritti, your consciousness doesn't become happy. If you have a sad vritti, your consciousness does not become sad. We've discussed this before. Way back in chapter 2, we said that consciousness reveals the happiness and sadness of your mind. If when your mind became happy, if consciousness also became happy, would you know that your mind became happy? Consciousness has to be the unchanging observer of the changing conditions of your mind. If suppose you feel sad, if consciousness gets sad at the same rate as sadness enters your mind, you won't even know that sadness is entering your mind. The consciousness must necessarily be an unchanging observer of the changing conditions of your mind. That's why it's compared to that ocean of consciousness. Water doesn't change. Ripples come and go. Water doesn't change. Events in life come and go. Your consciousness doesn't change. Then, excuse me. Sthira buddhihi asammudaha brahmavit brahmanistitaha. Brahmavit, a knower of Brahman, an enlightened person. An enlightened person is described in the third line as being asammudha, nice expression. Mudha, confused. Sammudha, completely confused. Asammudha, completely free from confusion. That enlightened person who is sthira buddhihi, whose buddhi, whose mind, whose intellect is sthita, it is firm, and sthitaha, how? In the last line, sthitaha, established, brahmani, established in Brahman, established in reality, established in that inner divinity, as we said. To have your mind be firm, I'll just share with you something that's found in Madhusudana's commentary. He points out very plainly and very appropriately that your mind will never be firmly established in this truth unless you are free from doubts and free from habitual wrong thinking. These are the two huge obstacles to enjoying the fruits of these teachings. Our minds are full of doubts, and we continually to think in wrong ways, even though we know better. For example, you have known for decades now that that you are not identical to your body. You've known that. I am not my body. I'm not my body. You know that. But if I pinch you, you'll say, "Hey, don't pinch me." I didn't pinch you. I pinched your body. Why did you say, "Don't pinch me"? Habitual wrong thinking. These are two huge errors, two huge obstacles that we all face: doubts and habitual wrong thinking. And as many of you know, Doubts are removed by Vedanta through the process called manana. Manana is a process of rational reflection to remove doubts, and this habitual wrong thinking is removed by nididhyasana, Vedantic contemplation. These are both huge topics. I won't go further. I'm just sharing it with you because found in the commentary. So to become firmly established in these teachings means not merely to attend a class like this and get it. So if you get it in this class, wonderful, but it's not enough. In addition to getting it, so to speak, it's crucial to remove doubts through the practice of manana and to remove this habitual wrong thinking through Vedantic contemplation. All right, next. Bahyasparsheshva saktatma, bahyasparsheshva saktatma, vindatyatmani yatsukam, vindatyatmani yatsukam, sabrahma yoga yuktatma, sabrahma yoga yuktatma, Sukhamakshayam ashnute, sukhamakshayam ashnute. Bahyasparsheshu, you have to break the words apart, asaktatma. And we have atma coming twice in this verse. Both times atma means mind here. Be very careful about that. We've had this discussion before. Atma means self in general, and it has different meanings in different contexts. Here it means mind. Asaktatma, one whose atma, one whose mind is asakta, free from attachment. You won't say consciousness is free from attachment. That doesn't make sense. It's not attached. Attachment is not a problem for Atma. Attachment is a problem for your mind. So certainly Atma has to mean mind in this context. Asaktatma, for one whose mind is free from attachment. Remember our definition of attachment? Emotional dependence. So one who has attachment is dependent on other things for his or her happiness and contentment. And here Sri Krishna says, asaktatma, for one whose mind is freed from attachment. Attachment for what? Bahya sparsheshu. Sparsha here means sense contact. Sense contact with bahya, external things. So simply it means one who is free from attachment for experiencing external things. External things ranges anything. You know, your favorite kind of coffee or tea, your favorite kind of ice cream, whatever it might be. Whatever it is outside. By the way, family members are outside or inside? Even family members are outside. Be very clear about this. If you are attached, emotionally attached to your family members, you're not doing them any favors, nor are you doing yourself a favor. Attachment means dependence, emotionally dependent. If you are emotionally dependent on someone, you are actually weakened in your ability to love and support the person, right? Because if you're dependent, you want to get something from the person. Well, getting something is kind of the opposite of love, isn't it? So let's be very clear that this kind of attachment or emotional dependence is not a good thing. And I kind of make an issue here because many of you know and use the word mamata, which very nicely means fondness or affection, but in Sanskrit, it literally means myness, mine. If your children are mine, they're in trouble and you're in trouble. if your parents are mine, if your spouse is mine. They're not yours. They're independent human beings. And when you have this attachment and identification, it just, in simple American language, you mess up the relationship completely. Best to love them free from emotional dependence, free from attachment. That's what Sri Krishna says here. So those enlightened ones who are free from attachment for external things, what about them? Vindati, they discover. Yat sukham, they discover sukha, happiness, fullness, completeness, atmani, in one's own self. The inner divinity. That ocean. How vast is your consciousness? The vastness of your consciousness, the boundarylessness of your consciousness, the unchangeable nature of your consciousness, all of these are described by that word ananda, sat chit ananda. So ananda, as you said before, is not an experience of bliss. Ananda describes the fullness, the vastness, the completeness of your true nature. In fact, that comes out more in the second half here. Saha Brahma Yoga Yuktatma. There's a second occurrence of the word Atma. Again, it means mind. One whose mind is Yoga Yukta is connected through spiritual practice, yoga, connected with what? Brahman. Again, Brahman, absolute reality, or more simply, inner divinity. One whose mind is connected, yukta, through spiritual practice, yoga, connected to what? Brahman, to that absolute reality, to your true nature, one who is enlightened. For that person, sukhamakshayam ashnute, that person, that enlightened person, ashnute, enjoys sukham, happiness, akshayam, unending happiness. Usually whatever happiness becomes, like those waves. We get waves of happiness, waves of sadness, whatever it is, those waves come and go. Here, we're talking about the enlightened person always enjoying happiness, and there's a very important point we need to make here. The happiness enjoyed by an enlightened person. We just got done saying that ananda is not some object that you can experience. Ananda, used in Advaita Vedanta, describes your true nature. Ananda describes you, the experiencer. Ananda does not describe something experienced. You see the difference? So ananda belongs to the experiencer. Ananda does not belong to anything experienced. Anything experienced is finite. Ananda is this ocean. This ocean is vast. It is infinite, so to speak. So then what does it mean for the enlightened person to ashnute, to experience unending happiness? And we'll just go back to our ocean here, plunge back into the ocean. Ananda is the water. Ananda describes your true nature. Your true nature is consciousness. Consciousness is represented in this metaphor by water. And consciousness, stay with the metaphor first. Just as water remains water, regardless of waves, big or small, in the same way, consciousness remains ananda, regardless of the vrittis in your mind. I'll say that again. Just as water remains water, regardless of the waves, in the same way, your consciousness remains ananda, remains vast, remains full, deep, and unchanged. Your consciousness remains unchanged in spite of whatever vrittis come and go. So very easy to make an error in interpreting this last half. If you think the enlightened person, he says, the enlightened person always enjoys happiness. What about Puja Swami Dayananda when he learned that his friend died? Can you imagine? He's on the phone, hearing this sad news that his dear friend has died in an automobile accident. Do you think he was happy? Of course not. Then how do we interpret this? The happiness enjoyed by the enlightened person is your true nature, that inner divinity, the consciousness which remains unaffected by the sad news. That's what it means to experience happiness. It means to know I am, my casual language, I am okay no matter what. Even in the presence of this bad news, my true nature remains full, complete, utterly unaffected. Let's see one more verse. Yehi samsparshaja bhoga, yehi samsparshaja bhoga, dukkha yonaya hevate, dukkha yonaya hevate, adyantavanta kaunteya, adyantavanta kaunteya, nate shuramate buddhaha, nateshu amate buddhaha. I hope we'll get in one more verse after this. We'll see how it goes. So now Sri Krishna is kind of warning Arjuna and warning all of us. And the warning is this, that in the first line, ye bhogaha, those enjoyments which are samsparshajaha, which are born of your senses, which are born of experience. We'll translate it as experiential enjoyments. He warns us that enjoyments, which are experiential in nature, are those experiential pleasures are dukkha yonayaha. They are the root cause for suffering. They are sources of suffering. Okay, we may not see the next verse. Let's just see. Though the pleasure, I'll paraphrase the first half. The pleasures you experience in life are sources of suffering? Huh? Yeah, that's what he says. And it makes sense if you look a little bit more deeply. Any kind of worldly pleasure is associated with suffering. How? First, why should I explain? Sri Krishna explains it perfectly. I need not explain. So Sri Krishna says, so here's our leading question. Why is it that worldly pleasures are invariably connected to suffering? Why? Because Kaunteya, O Arjuna, adyantavantaha. Those worldly pleasures have an adi, a beginning, and an anta, an end. All worldly pleasures have a beginning and an end. Now, when a worldly pleasure begins, no one complains. When a worldly pleasure comes to an end, That's where the problems begin. When a 2-year-old eats her last cookie, and she's looking for another cookie. Mom, can I have another cookie? Mom says no. Pleasure leads to suffering because pleasures come to an end. And there's a further problem. Not only do pleasures come to an end, but then after the pleasure comes to an end, more desires arise. Desires that can remain unfulfilled. So while you are, let me give you a concrete example. Suppose you're going through a rough patch in life, maybe financial problems, family problems, whatever, and you've gone for your favorite comfort food, maybe ice cream, whatever it is. So while you're enjoying your favorite comfort food, your financial troubles or family troubles temporarily fade away, right? That's why we call it a comfort food. But when eating the comfort food comes to an end, all those problems return. They don't go away. So notice the pleasure you have eating your comfort food is adyavantaha. It has an adi, a beginning. It has an anta, it has an end. Therefore, all worldly experiential pleasures are associated with suffering because they're followed by suffering. Every pleasure is followed by suffering, and Sri Krishna says, Nateshu ramate buddhaha. Buddhaha, a wise person, na ramate, does not revel teshu, in those worldly pleasures. A wise person does not revel in worldly pleasures. Why? Adyavantaha, because they will come to an end. Okay, we do have time for one last verse. This is a really a good place to conclude our class. Shaknoti haiva yasodhum, Shaknoti haiva yasodhum, Praksharira vimokshanat, Praksharira vimokshanat, Kama krodhodbhavam vegam, Kama krodhodbhavam vegam, Sayukta sasukhi naraha, Sayukta sasukhi naraha. Start in the second line. Prak, before, sharira vimokshanat. Before the vimokshana, the loss of sharira, body. Before you are freed from your body, simply means before you die. Prak sharira vimokshanat, before you die. First line, yaha, one who shaknoti is able to iha eva, here itself, here in this life, while you still have this physical body, one who is shaknoti, who is able to do what? Sodhum, to endure, to tolerate, to put up with, to endure what? End of the third line. One who is able to tolerate the vegam. Vegam means force, the pull, the push, the draw, the compulsion. That what kind of compulsion? Kama, krodha, udbhavam. The force which is udbhava, which is born of kama and krodha, desire and anger, or we could just as well say raga and dvesha, if we want. So the force of raga and dvesha, the force of anger and desire, one who can endure them even in life. What does it mean to endure the vega, the force of kama and krodha, even while you're alive? Well, remember all those waves in the ocean? They could be huge waves. waves with tremendous vega, force. As I said before, if you dive below the surface of the ocean, perfectly still. That stillness below the surface of the ocean represents the stillness of your true inner divine nature. To endure or resist the vega, the force of kama and krodha, desire and anger, to resist the force of raga and dvesha, compulsions to get what you want and avoid what you don't want. An enlightened person can effortlessly resist those forces. How? Figuratively speaking, by going for a swim and diving below the surface. Now, to dive below the surface, we can understand in two ways. The most obvious way of diving below the surface, it suggests meditation. But it need not be meditation. To simply appreciate the vastness of your own true divine nature, to appreciate the vastness, I apologize in advance for this word, imperturbability. That's got way too many syllables. But you know what I'm talking about. Imperturbable, can't be perturbed. Imperturbability describes the nature of your consciousness, being utterly unaffected by whatever is happening in your life, whatever is happening at work, whatever is happening at home, whatever is happening in your mind, in your heart, to discover that below the surface of all those waves, the waves caused by the problems at work, the waves caused by the problems at home, the waves caused by the problems in your mind, to appreciate that just below the surface of all those waves, what remains is unperturbed, utterly unperturbed. And I'm referring, of course, to your own consciousness, your own true nature. To appreciate this truth, saha, the one who can appreciate that truth. Notice, in the midst of the problems, peace is not something you find when all the problems of life go away. Well, actually, there is one kind of peace. There is one kind of peace you enjoy when all the problems of life go away, and that's the peace you have when you're dead. It'll come for us all, that kind of peace. Rest in peace, as they say. Without doubt, you will rest in peace, whether Vedanta goes in or not. You will absolutely rest in peace. But why wait? You can enjoy that peace now by appreciating that below the surface of all these disturbances, what remains is imperturbable consciousness, consciousness which is utterly unaffected by whatever is going on. Last line, saha, that enlightened person is yuktaha. This translation, my translation is mature. It's a fine translation, but in a more technical sense, yukta, joined. That person is connected to his or her true divine nature. That person is united with. That person appreciates fully their true divine nature. Saha naraha, and that person is sukhi. That person is happy. And the happiness that the person enjoys is not merely the blip. Look at this, a blip of happiness. You could enjoy in life a mere blip of happiness, a blip of happiness which comes and goes. Or you can enjoy the vast ocean of ananda. Look at the contrast. This is experiential happiness we saw in the last verse. Comes and goes, this blip of happiness, this little wave. But an enlightened person is one who appreciates the fullness and completeness of one's true nature. That is the ocean of ananda. Okay, it was a good place to conclude. Some important announcements. Tomorrow, Sunday, we have our question answer session, satsang at 6 p.m. We talked about the importance of manana. So please join us tomorrow if you can at 6 p.m. Oh, nice announcement. This coming week, probably on Wednesday, I'll be publishing a new video. This video, the topic of this video is a challenging video. In fact, I think the title is Advaita versus Bhakti. Because so many people think that these two are mutually incompatible. You're absorbed in oneness or you are immersed in bhakti. One or the other, pick one. And that's absolutely untrue. So how to understand the relationship between non-duality and bhakti, and especially what is the role of bhakti, devotion, and Advaita Vedanta, that's the topic of this video. It'll be published this next week, probably on Friday. A suggestion, if you sign up to, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, and that way you'll get automatically notified when it's published. One more announcement. First of all, I want to thank all the volunteers who stayed back to help with our gardening project, and they got a lot done. But I noticed that then when they were a little bit more than halfway done, it didn't just rain, we had hail. Did you see the hail last Saturday? So anyway, our gardening volunteers were curtailed in their work. So there's a little bit of gardening work left. If you are able to stay back for a while after class, you can get some gloves and you can meet in the lobby and help out with a little bit of gardening left to be done. That would be very nice. Thank you. And we will conclude with our closing prayers. Om Gananahan Tva Ganapatigam Havamahe Kaving Gavinam Upamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspataha Nashranvan Utabasira Saranam Om Mahaganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Apta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Vande Jagadguru. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschad Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Satkamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat. Om.